Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Carly Riley. I have been covering every day of the Sam Bankman-Fried trial, including today. I was in court all day long. And oh my gosh, do we have an episode for y'all today. Folks, Sam Bankman-Fried took the stand. However, he did not take the stand in front of a jury. Yeah, it was a day of just absolute twists and turns, lots of juicy stuff, testimony that I cannot wait to tell you about. But first, if you are enjoying these videos, please do like, subscribe, comment, do the things. Y'all know the drill. I really appreciate it. I love reading your comments. All right, let's talk about today. So Sam did not testify in front of a jury today. Why? Well, it turns out that there have been a lot of debates over what is and is not admissible in court with Sam's testimony. The defense wanted to introduce all sorts of testimony via Sam that the prosecution felt was irrelevant or out of scope or shouldn't be admissible for a variety of reasons, and they've been going back and forth behind the scenes with the judge in a series of letters, and the judge finally said, you know what, I can't determine what should be admissible or not just by reading these long documents y'all are sending me. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to send the jury out of the room, and we are going to hear just the parts of the testimony from Sam that you guys can't agree on. And I will hear that testimony. I will hear the direct questioning. I will hear the cross-examination, and then I will rule whether or not that testimony or parts of that testimony are ultimately admissible in front of a jury. So we had 3 hours of that today, basically a preview of what might come out in the testimony. But what was exciting about this to me is it felt like, oh, in theory, and I don't know if this will turn out to have been true once we've heard all of the testimony, like we might get some of the most salacious bits today if it's what the prosecution is objecting to have in open court. Now, I don't know, y'all can judge at the end of today if you think this is like what the juiciest bits we'll hear. We did have the prosecution ask Sam if he considered embezzling funds from customers to be properly safeguarding customer assets. So we'll talk about that. The structure for today. As far as I can tell, there were 5, I would say, categories that the defense wants to include in Sam's testimony that are up for debate. So let's go through them right now, all 5. Number 1, I'm going to call Signal testimony. And what I mean by this is Signal, the encrypted messaging app. They want Sam to be able to talk about why the company was using Signal and why it was not at all shady that all of his messages with Nishad and Caroline and Gary were deleted and there is no record of any of them. The second category is the North Dimension bank account. Folks have heard me talk about this before. It was basically an Alameda subsidiary company, North Dimension, that was accepting customer deposits for FTX back in the day when FTX didn't have its own bank accounts. But things got a little spicy there. Then there were the loans. We've talked about these before too. A lot of FTX executives, or several of the key FTX executives, got very big loans, hundreds of $1 million loans from Alameda. That's been very contentious. We talked about that. We talked about the terms of service. Where am I on? I don't know how to keep track of my fingers. And then finally, we talked a little bit about what happened with Sam in the Bahamas as everything was imploding. These are like the 5 high-level categories that defense seems to want to introduce via Sam's testimony. And I'm going to break it down what we heard today. Some of this got real hot. First, in this Signal category. So in general, the theme of today was like, my lawyers made me do it. This is, I guess, what's called an advice of counsel defense. Now, they're not putting on like a full advice of counsel defense, but basically they're trying to demonstrate that at a lot of different terms, Sam was consulting with lawyers who advised him in certain ways that made him take certain actions, and that will exonerate him in some ways. So with this Signal chat stuff, this is something that has come up a number of times as being shady. All these messages are deleted. The prosecution has clearly leaned in on that. And so when defense questioned Sam today as part of their direct, they brought up something called the document retention policy, which Sam says is this policy that was drafted by his chief regulatory officer. Take a shot every time Sam says chief regulatory officer today, who is Dan Freeberg. He's going to come up a couple of times today. And basically, this was about what corporate documents had to be retained and what had to be deleted. I actually thought Sam held up pretty well in this portion of cross-examination by the prosecution, and then he held up fine with all the defense questions because they're softballing him and want him to do well, right? They're setting him up to succeed. But I thought he did fine on this part because, frankly, with the Signal chat stuff, I'm like, I don't just on principle have an issue with Signal chats, encrypted messages being deleted. I genuinely do understand that if you're operating a business like FTX, you may do things that are sort of towing up to a line, or you're doing things that are totally not crossing a line at all, but that without enough context in a certain message may sound bad. And if a disgruntled ex-employee had proof of somebody saying something that could look like it could sound bad, you could get them in trouble. Like, I understand why Sam would want signal messages deleted, even if they weren't doing anything nefarious. And he was able to compellingly, I thought, relatively speaking, make that case, even while he was being cross-examined by the prosecution. But I will say, it feels honestly not that relevant. And frankly, I was kind of disappointed in general with this preview we got of the defense's case today, because it felt like most of the things they brought up were relevant on the periphery, but weren't cutting to the core of the crime that's being alleged here. And we had the judge sort of speak to that as well, so I'll tell you about that. Second topic today was the North Dimension bank account. And so again, what Sam did with his testimony here, with help of defense's questioning, was basically to say, I didn't really have anything to do with setting up the North Dimension bank account. Now, a little bit of context, I mentioned this at the top. North Dimension was a bank account that folks would wire money to in the early days of FTX when they wanted to have money deposited onto the FTX exchange, because FTX didn't have its own bank accounts. And prosecution has implied, argued that it's like a little bit shady that we had this North Dimension bank account that didn't have the name Alameda anywhere in it, which meant that customers didn't actually know that they were wiring money to Alameda, or they would have to dig a lot to find that. And the defense had actually said in their opening statements, there was nothing secretive about this Alameda bank account that people were wiring money to. It said it right there on the wire instructions. Well, fast forward to testimony we've gotten. It didn't say Alameda anywhere on any wire instructions that FTX customers were given. It said North Dimension, which was distinctly different from Alameda. So I can only assume that maybe Sam gave his lawyers like bad information. I've talked about that before on this show. In any case, where we landed here was Sam being like, I had nothing to do with setting up the North Dimension, first of all, corporate structure that was a subsidiary of Alameda, or the bank account. I signed a piece of paper to set up the bank account because it was put in front of me by my lawyer, Dan Freeberg, or by the chief regulatory officer, Dan Freeberg. And Dan told me to sign. I assumed it was all copacetic. I signed. That was that. And again, here I'm like, it is very much within the realm of possibility to me, and perhaps even likely, that at the time Sam was getting FTX off the ground, still technically running Alameda, had truly 10 trillion things on his mind and on his plate, that somebody else came up with the idea of setting up this other bank account for who knows any number of various reasons at the time that seemed reasonable, and then this document ended up in front of him. He signed it. He really had no idea why it was getting set up. It could also be totally possible that he very much did know that this North Dimension bank account was being set up to basically not have Alameda in the name, to keep customers from readily finding out that they were sending money to Alameda. I don't know, but it almost felt like it doesn't totally matter. The interesting part of this bit came when the prosecution cross-examined Sam, and we got to look at something called a payment agent agreement, which is basically the document that outlined this relationship of Alameda accepting customer deposits on behalf of FTX. And the prosecution said to Sam, they were questioning him about whether or not he believed Alameda could use customer deposits that were sent to them via this system. Let me pause here for just a moment to talk to y'all about how Sam answered questions on the stand. It was pulling teeth. It was so miserable to sit through. Again, like, defense questions him, all good, easy. Questions around the signal stuff, I thought he handled it very well. We start getting into this North Dimension bank account stuff, and then basically from that moment on, he was insufferable. It was Sam, but on like overdrive, where he doesn't answer the question that he's asked. When it's pointed out that he didn't answer the question that you asked, he acts like he didn't understand the original question. You re-ask the question. He once again says, well, did you mean it like this? I may be misinterpreting, and I apologize. I'm going to answer what I believe you're asking, but you can certainly correct me if I'm answering this wrong. And then he's always answering it wrong, and then he gets corrected, and then he still doesn't freaking answer it right. He also just absolutely word vomits. I have never had such a hard time taking notes as I did today, trying to write down the answers that Sam was giving. It was just absolute word salad that meant absolutely nothing. The judge got annoyed. We'll probably talk about that in a minute. But bringing this full circle, so the prosecution was trying to ask him about, was it your belief that Alameda could use the customer money that was being wired to them on behalf of FTX customers who wanted to use it on FTX? And my God, did we go 10 rounds around the ring to try and get an answer. But ultimately, Sam's answer was a version of yes. Yes, I believed that they could do that. And then Prosecution says, all right, here's this payment agent agreement we've been talking about that documents this relationship between Alameda and FTX when it comes to customer deposits being transferred to a Alameda bank account. Where does it say that Alameda could spend that customer money? And then Sam paused for like 5 minutes while he read the document in court. Maybe the pause was longer than that. I don't know. And then he proceeds to word salad and dissemble and do all of the things until finally the prosecution keeps drilling him down. And of course, the answer is there's no line in this document that allows for that at all. Right? Now, he had interpretations about margin trading and blah, 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 blah. Oh, this was good. This was rich. Before he answers that, he's read the document and he's like, okay, I want to caveat this with like, I'm not a lawyer. This isn't legal advice. He said it like 3 different ways. He spent a solid 2 minutes talking about how I'm not a lawyer, so this is not a legal interpretation. It was like, yeah, no, buddy. No shit, buddy. We know you're not a lawyer. And it was like this stalling tactic. It was just... Oh, so anyway, there's of course no line in this payment agent agreement that says he can use customer money. So we're still left a little bit unclear as to where that interpretation on his end came from. But he did testify that it was his belief at the time that there were certain circumstances and situations in which Alameda could use that money. Okay. The third thing that defense brought up today is these loans that were made to FTX executives by Alameda for various venture investments and other things. This part was fine. So the point that defense was trying to make, it appears, is like all of these loan agreements, these promissory notes, et cetera, these were drafted by counsel. Again, it all comes back to lawyers did this. The problem with this part of the testimony was like, yeah, sure, fine. I don't think that the way they structured these loans to FTX executives and the fact that loans were made to FTX executives to then give back to different elements of Alameda to make these venture investments, nobody seems to be arguing that that was illegal. Optically, it doesn't look great, especially given what it turns out was going on otherwise. But that in and of itself, lawyers drafted loan agreements and they created a structure in which loans would get made. That's fine. That doesn't actually speak to, was the money being used to make the loans illegally obtained because it was taken from customers' money that wasn't supposed to be touched? So anyway, that's really all I'll say about that section of it. There wasn't like too much there because I was like, yeah, sure, fine. Okay, I get it. Your lawyer told you to do this. Number 4, the terms of service. This is where shit got so spicy. Oh my God. Okay. So this went on for so long. So the point of this testimony on the defense's side is once again to say that, hey, this lawyer, this general counsel, Cam Sun at FTX drafted these terms of service and a lawyer wrote these things, which, okay. And then defense took Sam through some specific parts of the terms of service. I think one part in particular, which is the part about margin trading and the fact that there was a chance, and this was written in the terms of service, that there could be these socialized losses. We've talked about that a lot on this show. It's also otherwise known as clawbacks. I don't want to get into the example of all this because we already have a dense episode as it is, but basically just making the point that within the terms of service, there were provisions that allowed for the possibility that if you were somebody who was trading on margin or potentially trading futures, your money certainly could be loaned out to others, like Alameda, could be lost, collateral could be taken from you, et cetera, et cetera. So we saw that. And then this is where the prosecution came in with their cross and just like, whew. And this is where Sam, I feel like, really lost his credibility. He was like pausing for answers. It felt like when he was drinking water, it was because he was nervous and trying to buy himself time. And the piece that stands out the most was the prosecution asking him, did you talk to your lawyers about the fact that Alameda could have a negative balance on FTX, unlike any other customers? Well, Sam claims he did not even know that allow negative existed. This is a feature that was coded into the code base that Gary Wang claims Sam told him to code into the code base in 2019 that allowed Alameda to have an infinitely negative balance on the exchange. Sam says he didn't even know about that. He knew that certain what did he call it? Certain like things had happened because of speed bumps. That was the word he used, that had happened previously on the platform that was bad for users. So they had to make changes to certain things for Alameda. And he thought maybe other market makers, he really didn't know, but it wasn't for typical accounts. But I thought that, just like blah, 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 that like really was hard to follow and dissembling and not answering her actual question. It was during this part of the testimony that the judge got quite frustrated with Mr. Bankman-Fried. And really, he laid into him a couple of times, just being like, answer the question you're asked. Don't answer some other question. And answer the question you're asked. He just kept answering the wrong question. It's just classic Sam. Up and down, absolutely classic Sam. Now, at one point in this part, and this is important because we're almost wrapping here, the prosecution was asking him, did you have any deeper discussions with Kansan, your general counsel, about any of the parts of this terms of service? If your whole testimony is advice of counsel, oh, my counsel was telling me to do all these things. Well, did you talk further with Kansan about, for example, the digital assets portion of the terms of service, which said that you would never use or lend out or spend or whatever, I'm paraphrasing language here, digital assets deposited by customers? And Sam said something along the lines of, and I couldn't get the exact thing, but basically like, no, I wasn't going to challenge my own general counsel on what he thought was best. And he said it kind of smug, like, again, he's leaning back on like, I just was listening to my counsel. I wasn't in a position to doubt the word of my general counsel. And it's like, what are you talking about? If you don't tell your lawyer about the parts of the business that pertain to the thing he's writing, and he has a certain assumption about the way those parts of the business are run, maybe based on things you've said in the past, it's not like, oh, well, he gave me advice to do something. He gave you advice based on completely incomplete information because you were withholding information from him. It's so lame to try and be like, my counsel told me to do XYZ. Well, sure, your counsel didn't know you were breaking the law. Counsel didn't know that. So I raised this as an important point because the judge actually brought this up later. I'm going to mention that in just one moment, but I told y'all there was a moment when the prosecutor asked Sam if he considered not embezzling funds as an important way to safeguard customer assets. It was a bit of a heated exchange. Things were getting riled up. She threw that out there. The defense attorney objected to it, of course. The judge sustained that objection. Sam then proceeded to say, yes, as in, yes, I do think not embezzling funds from customers is an important part of safeguarding customer assets. And then the courtroom kind of laughed. And then the judge was like, come on, Sam, if we object, if it's sustained, you don't have to answer it. Like, you've been in the courtroom long enough. And then he was like, well, I wanted to answer that one. Anyway, that was a fun moment. The number 5 here that we talked about with Sam, that was the point that the defense wanted to raise, was around the fact that Bahamian regulators, the Securities Exchange in the Bahamas, had insisted and required, and it was like a court-ordered thing, that Sam and Gary send all of the FTX assets to Bahamian regulators while they were there. This is something we've heard about in the past. The prosecution had sort of made it sound like Sam wanted to give their assets to the Bahamian regulators because he thought that the Bahamian regulators would be more favorable to him. But the testimony that we got from Sam today, and then actually by another witness that we heard from today, Crystal Roll, was that he was court ordered to do that. The prosecution didn't even get into that with him. My general sense with that is like, that's probably true. You know what? He was told he had to transfer the assets. Maybe a piece of him liked the idea of doing that because he thought the Bahamian regulators would be more favorable to him. He also was court ordered to do that. So we're not even going to worry about that. So coming back. So now, though, that's the conversation that we've had. Defense has talked to them about it. Prosecution has crossed them on it. And the judge now has to make a determination about whether or not this is admissible. And this is going to bring us back to this point I was making about Sam saying that he wasn't going to question his general counsel or whatever. So Judge Kaplan at the end was ready to hear from both the defense and the prosecution as to why they believed that the testimony we had just heard should or should not be allowed in court. And he opens it up by talking to the defense, and he's like, look, if somebody goes and robs a bank and then retains a lawyer and says to that lawyer, hey, I want to buy a house on Billionaires Row. Can you go draft up a bunch of contracts for that or deeds or whatever, blah, 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 do a bunch of legal stuff around this, and never tells the lawyer where the money to buy the house came from? You can't then show up in court and be like, I'm innocent because of the advice of my counsel was that the loan that I got to buy this house was totally okay. Like, the lawyer doesn't know about the shit you're doing wrong. And it was like, yeah, that's a problem throughout a bunch of the stuff we heard about today was, again, Sam being like, my counsel told me that these terms of service were okay. Sure, okay, yeah, fine. Your counsel didn't know what you were doing. Hey, my counsel told me that this loan structure was okay. Yeah, sure, the loan structure was fine. The problem was that you were being loaned money from customers that wasn't supposed to be touched. And so, the defense pushed back against that a little bit and said, look, your example doesn't apply here because Sam didn't steal this money, so it's not the same as robbing the bank. In any case, defense pushed back, prosecution pushed back again, and ultimately Judge Kaplan said, I'm going to rule on all of this tomorrow morning. So we do not yet know if what we heard today is going to be admissible in court. Selfishly, there's a piece of me that just wants it not admissible in court because I don't want to listen to it all again. Like, I already heard it. I sat through 3 hours of it today. Please don't make me listen to Sam just sit there and absolutely not answer a single question. Anyway, there was so much more, honestly, today that I'm not even going to get into because those are the salient highlights. I mean, we heard from three witnesses in the morning. Truthfully, those witnesses, once Sam took the stand, they almost became so irrelevant because everything that matters is really what Sam is going to say over the next 2 days. And I will be there keeping y'all posted all along the way. So I will be back tomorrow when we get the full Sam Bankman-Fried testimony, and I cannot wait. Thank you all so much for listening. Please do like, subscribe, comment, tell me what you want to hear more of, ask questions. Love engaging with you, and I'll see you tomorrow.